Thank you, Greg and Lee and Peter. Delighted to be here with you, and really delighted to be with such an esteemed group of people. But I've got a question for you. Do you consider yourself to be a trusting person? Let me put it another way. Would you put your life in the hands of a total stranger? And the latter question probably makes you feel a little uneasy. But the reality is that you do put your life and the lives of the people whom you love in the hands of total strangers, hundreds, if not thousands of times per day. Take me, for example. This morning, I woke up. I switched on the light, trusting that I would not be electrocuted by a faulty lamp, cord, or socket. I ate breakfast in a cafe, trusting that I would not be poisoned by salmonella in my toasted sandwich. I got into a car, trusting that every one of the thousands of components was sound, that the mechanic had serviced it properly, and that the other drivers wouldn't kill me. And then I walked from my hotel across Elizabeth Street in peak hour, hundreds of cars bearing down on me, Sydney drivers, and nothing to protect me except for a red light and a white line. It's scary. But if I were to rationalise these decisions, they all make sense. First, because I've done these things hundreds of times before and I haven't suffered. But more importantly, because I know that I live in a society where human behaviour is governed by conventions and rules. So I don't need to personally know the people in the cars on Elizabeth Street to trust that they will stop. And they will stop because the law says they have to. They will stop because our society says it's good manners to wait your turn. They will stop because breaking those rules will have social consequences and employment consequences and economic consequences, far more inconvenient than the temporary inconvenience of waiting for me to cross. That capacity to trust in unknown humans, not because of a belief in our innate goodness, but because of the systems that we humans have made, that is the true genius of our species. We can work together because we can trust. We can trade because we can trust. We can express opinions because we can trust. Now, let's replace a fellow human in these day-to-day interactions with artificial intelligence, AI. What would it take for you to have the same level of trust in AI as you would extend to a human? To chat with your child, to drive your taxi, to scan a battlefield and zero in on a human target, to scan the crowd at a concert and match the faces to those from a crime database, to monitor the keystrokes and eye movement and concentration levels of every single one of thousands of employees in your workplace and decide who gets to keep their jobs next week. Now, every one of these things can be done today, is being done today. So, show of hands, does anyone feel entirely comfortable? Not many hands. So what is it about AI that unnerves us? And I suspect it's a combination of two things. The first is we lack information. The knowledge, it seems to be concentrated in a priesthood, a cabal. The number of AI experts today, it's tiny. An estimated 22,000 worldwide are qualified to the level of PhD. Now, people with rare skills in high demand come at an eye-watering price. And that makes it very difficult to keep them in universities and public agencies. And it's not unknown for technology developers to buy up IT faculties holus bolus. And whether these experts work in industry or the public sector or universities, there are often commercial or security reasons to keep quiet about their activities. So what is this priesthood capable of creating? Not knowing makes us uneasy, and so does finding out. Consider Google, which this month renamed its entire research division Google AI. And presumably, that's in case the message, AI is everything and everything is AI, in case that message needed to be made any clearer. Google routinely astonishes the world by bulldozing supposedly hard limits of AI capability. And we had an interesting example last week. In footage that was beamed around the world, and many of you will have seen this, Google debuted an AI named Google Duplex. And Google Duplex makes phone calls on your behalf and chats with the human beings who answers. And Google Duplex chats in a human voice with a rising inflection and occasionally, to make it very unlikely that the real human would ever twig that the other voice belonged to a machine. Now, for nearly 70 years, the world has been waiting for an AI that could fool us into thinking it was human. We call it the Turing test, named after the scientist who proposed it in 1950, Alan Turing. And Alan Turing began with the question, can machines think? And since we ourselves can't agree on a single test for what thinking means and what it really is, Turing replaced it with a thought experiment that he called the Imitation Game, and you might have seen the movie of the same name. And in the Imitation Game, the challenge is, can we build a machine that would pass as a human to a human if we couldn't see it and just judged it by its words? Now, if you go out on the web and you listen and you find it, you hear Google Duplex book a haircut and then a table at a restaurant, when you hear that, some observers say the Turing test has been passed. And as a result, your world has changed. Every phone call you make or receive is going to have a niggling doubt that wasn't there before. That could be a machine on the other end of the call. So we lack knowledge of developments that can affect us immediately and directly. The second is that we lack foreknowledge. We give up our data today without knowing what others might be able to do with it tomorrow. For example, when you uploaded your photos to Facebook, did you expect that Facebook would be able to scan them, name all the people, identify your tastes in food and clothing and hobbies, diagnose certain genetic disorders like Down syndrome, decide on your personality type, and then package up all that information for advertisers? You probably didn't anticipate that. But we can't unpick our choices. And it could be that we and our children can't escape the implications. So one response to these questions would be to conclude that the only safe way forward is to ban AI. And of course, that would be a tragic mistake for Australia. It certainly wouldn't halt progress, because I find it difficult to believe that China and France and the United Kingdom and the United States and every other nation that has staked its future on AI would now step back from the race. Why would they? When they can see that for all the risks and for all the mistakes that we will inevitably make, the future has infinite promise. Healthcare available to all, tailored precisely to the individual. Your personal chauffeur, a privilege previously only available to the super wealthy. An AI assistant for each of us to manage our appointments and remind us of those things that we would doubtless forget. So, of course, we want those benefits for Australia. A ban would simply discourage research and development in the places where we most want to see it, in reputable institutions like CSIRO's Data 61 and our universities. Of course, on the other hand, the fastest way to end up with a total ban is to allow a free-for-all. A free-for-all that allows unscrupulous and unthinking and just plain incompetent people to do their worst. No, we want rules that allow us to trust AI, just as they allow us to trust our fellow humans. So my question again, what would it take for you to extend your trust to AI? So think back to the web of rules that protected me when I stepped out onto Elizabeth Street this morning. We could think of that web of rules as a spectrum. And on the spectrum, a horizontal line, on the extreme left, I'll do your left. On the extreme left, we have light touch rules, manners and customs, just like we bring up our children today. As we move to the right, the rules become more binding. We next see codes that govern behaviour in organisations, standards applied to manufactured products, and regulations that apply to the practice of medicine, finance and trade. Further along, the criminal law, severe consequences when you break it. To the extreme right, international prohibitions against chemical and biological weapons. And different human behaviours are regulated at different points depending on their capacity for harm. So the challenge is to develop a similar spectrum of regulations and rules for AI. Not expecting a single solution, but instead an evolving web. At the left end, light touch end, consumer expectations for things like digital assistance. At the other extreme, global governance for weapons of war, military devices that can select and kill their targets without a human in the loop. Interestingly, at that extreme, Australians are already leading the discussion. It was an Australian who put the issue on the global agenda in 2015, Professor Toby Walsh. Through his network, he initiated a letter to the United Nations calling for a global ban on autonomous weapons. It was signed by more than 1,000 leaders of the global tech community, including Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking. This year, Professor Walsh led the global boycott of a South Korean university that was planning to develop AI weapons in partnership with a defence manufacturer. The boycott, it was amazing. It was reported around the world and it achieved its aim. The university's president agreed to bar all research directed to these ends. It is an important reminder that we should never discount how influential Australian voices can be. But I'm today going to leave that particular discussion to Toby Walsh and others. Instead, I've been thinking about the role that we could play at the left-hand end of the spectrum, the end of most immediate daily concern to you and me. Our day-to-day interactions with technology providers, those who make the sort of things that you might encounter in a workplace or in your family home. Now, I look out and I see an audience of enthusiastic technology adopters. But who among you believes that your relationship with social media companies is built on trust and mutual respect? Now, the sector, God bless them, is working very hard to develop it. Google has an ethics board. Microsoft published a 150-page book on developing human-friendly AI. The word of the moment in the tech sector is responsible. Now, these measures are surely positive as far as they go, but you have to ask, who is defining or auditing the standards? And are they making you, for example, feel any better? Now, it would be different for the government. You could imagine that a government department would vet the provider of a service that, for example, replaces social workers with algorithms that predict the likelihood that a particular child will be violent in school. And for the record, that's not fiction. A child violence predicting algorithm has been trialled. But how many of us, how many consumers are going to have the knowledge or the time to individually vet every AI that they encounter? When was the last time that you read the terms and conditions before you clicked accept? What we need is an agreed standard and a clear signal so that we, individual consumers, don't need the expert knowledge to make ethical choices, and so that the companies know from the outset how they are expected to behave. So my proposal is a trust mark. Its working title is the Turing Certificate, of course named in honour of Alan Turing. Companies would be able to apply for a Turing certification, and if they meet the standards and comply with the auditing requirements, they would then be allowed to display the Turing stamp. And then consumers and governments could use their purchasing power to reward and encourage ethical AI. It works in other domains. I'm sure that everybody in this audience would prefer to purchase coffee that carries the Fair Trade logo. That logo tells you that an independent auditor has verified that the farmers received a fair price and the coffee was produced without using child or slave labour. And the Turing Certificate would do the same for ethical AI. Independent auditors would certify the AI developers' products, their business processes, and their ongoing compliance with clear and defined expectations. Now, the first response to a certification scheme is, oh, but that costs money. And I understand that response because I thought that way myself when I was building my company, a company called Axon Instruments over in San Francisco. And I was making a device that was designed to be surgically implanted into human brains. That's living people's brains. And I expected to face a long and torturous process to meet the very exacting international ISO 9000 standards for good manufacturing practice. What I discovered was that in practice, the standards were the scaffold that I needed in order to build a competitive company, because those standards baked in expectations of quality from the start. Because true quality is achieved by design, not by test and reject. It's an important principle. So we maintained those exacting design and business practices for our non-medical products too, because they made us a better company and gave us a commercial edge. Done right, the costs of securing certification should then be covered by increased sales from customers who are prepared to make a choice and even pay a premium. And for example, the customer could be the government. Governments are already using and building AI into staff recruitment. Others are exploring its potential in decision-making and service delivery. Those government contracts are likely to be extremely valuable for the companies who supply those capabilities. So imagine if the government demanded a Turing stamp. It would send a very powerful signal. So would the Turing stamp be granted to organisations or to their products? Well, the answer is both. Has to be both. Now, this is the model that has long been accepted in the manufacturing sector. As you know, if you buy a washing machine, it will still be the same washing machine in 5 years' time. But if you download an app, it may well be radically different in 5 weeks' time. So when you trade with an AI developer, you expect to have an ongoing relationship. I think you would want the company that stores your data and develops your upgrades to be ethical through and through. Now, of course, in the manufacturing sector, the standards are both mandatory and enforceable, because manufacturing is a highly visible process. For AI, it's possible that mandatory certification systems would be cumbersome. So the voluntary Turing system would allow responsible companies to opt in and reap the benefits of having opted in. But I have to be very clear, a voluntary system does not mean self-certification. It means that the companies would voluntarily submit themselves to an external process. Smart companies trading on quality would welcome an auditing system that weeded out poor behaviour. And consumers would rightly insist on a stamp with proven integrity. So is this a global measure that Australia could help to foster? Well, surely we have more to gain than most, because when we compete in the global market, we have to compete on quality. It's true in agriculture. Our reputation secures a premium price. It's true in higher education, in universities. Our reputation is the foundation of our third biggest export industry. And it should be true in technology. A system that rewards quality and prioritises ethics will reward Australia. Now, last week's federal budget made what I like to think of as a promising first instalment. $30 million has been allocated for AI, including an AI roadmap and a national AI ethics framework. And I hope that we can use our influence to shape a responsible direction for the world. So it may well be that in a few years' time, when I step out into Elizabeth Street, I'll be walking into the path of a self-driving car. So let's make it a step that we can all take with trust. Thank you.